My grandmother never owned a thermometer with a digital display, and she never once drove to a pharmacy for a headache, a sore throat, an upset stomach, or a bee sting. Not once in her whole life. And before you think I am exaggerating to make a point, let me tell you what she did own instead. A row of glass jars on a shelf above the stove, each one filled with dried flowers or leaves she had picked herself from the meadow behind our house, and a small wooden box where she kept the ones that needed to stay dark. That shelf was her medicine cabinet. 5 plants, used in different combinations depending on what was wrong, carried her, my mother, and eventually me, through every ordinary illness a family runs into across a normal year. And I want to tell you, the modern medicine cabinet most people keep in their bathroom today, full of bottles with long chemical names, is standing in for something that grew wild along the edge of every village in Bavaria for longer than anyone can remember. My name is Martin Hofer. I grew up on a small farm in the foothills south of Munich. My grandmother Rosina raised 8 people through the kind of childhood scrapes, fevers, and stomach troubles every family has, and she did it with a basket and a pair of scissors instead of a car and a receipt. I am not a doctor, and nothing I tell you today replaces one. But I want to show you exactly what she kept on that shelf, why each plant did what it did, and why this knowledge has almost completely disappeared from how families think about their own health. Let me start with the first plant, because it is the one almost everyone has heard of, even if they have forgotten what it actually does. Chamomile. You probably know chamomile as a tea you drink before bed. My grandmother knew it as far more than that. German chamomile, the kind that grew along every fence row and field edge near our farm, carries an oil inside its small white flowers that turns a deep blue color when you steam it, and that blue oil is where the real work happens. It calms an upset stomach. It eases the kind of cramping that comes with a bad meal or a nervous gut. It soothes inflamed skin when you apply the cooled tea directly with a cloth, and it has been used this way in Germany for so long, and so consistently, that even today German doctors still recognize chamomile as an officially approved remedy. The same flower my grandmother pulled out of the meadow with her bare hands. She would gather the flower heads on a dry morning in early summer, right after the dew had burned off but before the heat of the day, because that is when the oil sits richest in the flower. She spread them on a clean cloth in the shade to dry for several days, never in direct sun, because sun bleaches out the very oil you're trying to keep. Then she stored them in a glass jar away from light, sealed tight so the fragrance did not drift away into the kitchen air. When one of us had a stomach ache, a cup of chamomile tea, steeped covered for 10 minutes so the oil did not float away in the steam, was the first thing she reached for. When someone had a small rash or a patch of irritated skin, or even a sty forming at the edge of an eye, she would make a stronger tea, let it cool completely, soak a clean cloth in it, and lay that over the skin for 10 or 15 minutes at a time. Simple, and it worked far more often than not. The second plant on her shelf looked like nothing at all, which is exactly why most people walk past it without a second glance. Yarrow. Yarrow grows in almost every meadow in Bavaria. A tall plant with feathery leaves and small white flower clusters on top, the kind of thing you would call a weed if nobody told you otherwise, but my grandmother called it the soldier's herb, an old name that goes back centuries because it was carried on to battlefields to stop bleeding. The leaves, when crushed fresh, have a real and direct effect of slowing blood from a small cut, and the flower carries the same blue oil family found in chamomile, which means it also calms inflammation and helps a fever break by encouraging the body to sweat properly. She used it 2 ways. For a small cut or scrape, fresh crushed yarrow leaf pressed directly onto the wound, held there a few minutes with a clean cloth wrapped around it, often was enough to slow the bleeding before she even reached for a proper bandage. It will not close a deep cut, and anything that needs stitches needs a doctor. She was always plain about that. But for the small cuts a child collects every summer from climbing fences and running through brush, it worked better than anything else within reach, For a fever, she would make a tea, usually blending it with the next plant on her shelf, and have the sick person drink it warm, then lie under a heavy blanket so the body could sweat the fever out the way it was designed to. This is something almost nobody does anymore, because we have been taught to fight a fever instead of working with it, but a controlled sweat under blankets, with plenty of warm fluid, is exactly what families did for generations before fever reducers sat in every bathroom cabinet. The third plant is the one she paired with yarrow most often for that fever tea, and it grew not in the meadow, but on a tree at the edge of our garden. Elderflower. Every farmhouse in our valley had an elder bush or tree somewhere near the house, heavy with clusters of small white flowers every June. My grandmother harvested those clusters whole, hung them upside down in bunches in the attic to dry, and then stripped the tiny dried flowers off the stems into jars once they were ready. Elderflower has been used across German and broader European tradition for exactly the same purpose for longer than written records can confirm, to bring on a gentle sweat and help a fever pass through the body instead of dragging on. Combined with yarrow, sometimes with a little peppermint added for the stomach, she would make what was simply called fever tea in our house. Equal parts of each, steeped covered in hot water for a good 10 minutes, drunk as hot as you could manage while sitting wrapped in a blanket. It will not replace a doctor for a serious illness, and a high fever, especially in a small child, always deserves real medical attention. My grandmother knew that line and never crossed it. But for the ordinary fevers that come with a cold or a mild flu, this tea and the rest under blankets that came with it was the whole treatment, every single time, for generations. The fourth plant on her shelf is the one I remember most vividly from my own childhood because it grew right at my feet every single summer, in the exact same spots where a child is most likely to get hurt. Plantain, not the banana relative. The small, ribbed, broad-leafed plant that grows in every lawn, every path edge, every patch of disturbed ground around a farmhouse, the plant most people pull out as a weed without ever knowing what it can do. My grandmother called it the herb that always grows where you need it, because it tends to come up exactly along the paths children run barefoot, the exact place a bee sting or a scraped knee is most likely to happen. When one of us got stung by a bee or a wasp, she would not run to the house first. She would bend down right where we were standing, pick a plantain leaf, crush it between her fingers until the juice came out, and press it directly onto the sting. The pain eased remarkably fast, and the swelling that usually follows a sting was noticeably smaller by the next morning. The same leaf, chewed or crushed and applied fresh, worked on small scrapes and cuts too, and a tea made from the dried leaf was her remedy for a scratchy, irritated throat or lingering cough, because the same soothing, slightly sticky quality in the leaf that calms an angry sting also coats and calms an irritated throat from the inside. The fifth and final plant on her shelf was the one closest to the kitchen door, because she used it constantly, not just as medicine, but in nearly everything she cooked. Sage. Every Bavarian farmhouse garden has a sage bush, gray-green and fragrant, growing right outside the kitchen door where it is easy to reach. My grandmother used it in cooking constantly, but she also kept a separate jar of dried leaves specifically for the medicine shelf, because sage has a strong, sharp oil inside its leaves that does real work against the bacteria responsible for a sore, infected throat. When someone in the house had a sore throat, she would steep a strong sage tea, let it cool until it was warm but not hot, and have them gargle with it several times a day, swallowing a little each time. The sharpness of the tea itself seemed almost unpleasant to a child. I remember complaining about it more than once, but the relief came quickly, usually within a day, faster than I ever remember a sore throat clearing on its own. She also used sage tea for headaches that came with tension, and as a calming throat rinse any time someone had been talking or shouting too much, which on a working farm with 8 people happened more often than you would think. Now I want to step back, because there is something larger here than 5 plants on a shelf. Think about what a modern household spends on the exact problems these 5 plants were built to handle. a bottle of upset stomach medicine, a box of fever reducer, an antihistamine cream for a bee sting, a bag of cough drops, a bottle of antiseptic throat spray. Buy all of that once, replace it as it expires or runs out, and a family can easily spend well over $100 a year just maintaining a basic medicine cabinet for nothing more serious than the ordinary aches and irritations that come with raising children or simply living a life. None of those products is wrong to own, and for serious illness, a real doctor and real medicine are exactly what you need. My grandmother never pretended otherwise. But for the small, constant, everyday discomforts, the upset stomach, the mild fever, the bee sting, the scratchy throat, the headache from tension, there was a meadow doing the same job for free. Here's the part that should make you stop and think. None of these 5 plants are rare. None of them require a greenhouse or special soil or years of training to grow. Chamomile and yarrow grow wild in almost any field that is not regularly mowed with chemicals. Elderflower grows on a bush you can plant in a single afternoon and harvest every June for the rest of your life. Plantain grows in your own lawn right now, probably within 10 steps of your back door, and most people pull it out without a second thought. Sage costs almost nothing at a garden center and lives for years in a small pot on a windowsill. This knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because nobody can sell you a meadow. A pharmaceutical company cannot put a brand name on the plantain growing in your lawn, and a drugstore cannot charge you a subscription fee for a sagebush by your back door. The knowledge survived in places like my grandmother's kitchen specifically because there was no other option for so many generations, and once that necessity faded, in just 1 or 2 generations in most families, the glass jars came down off the shelf and were never refilled. So here's what I want you to actually do. Walk around your own yard this week and see if you can find a plantain already growing somewhere you did not expect, probably along a path or in a patch of lawn that gets walked on often. If you find chamomile or yarrow growing wild nearby, that is worth knowing too, though I would always tell you to be certain of what you are picking before you use any wild plant, and when in doubt, buy dried chamomile, yarrow, elderflower, plantain, or sage from a trusted herb shop instead of guessing in the field. Consider planting 1 elder bush and 1 sage plant near your kitchen door this season, because both will keep working for you, with almost no care at all, for years to come. And start simple. A cup of chamomile tea the next time your stomach is unsettled. A crushed plantain leaf the next time someone in your family gets stung. None of this replaces real medical care for anything serious, and I want to say that plainly one more time before I close, but for the small, ordinary discomforts of an ordinary week, these 5 plants did the job for my family for longer than anyone can trace. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 you already have growing near your own home without knowing it, and tell me what your own grandmother or grandfather used for the same ordinary aches, because every story you share teaches someone else something they might have otherwise lost for good. Next time, I want to show you what German families did every single Sunday for generations. A quiet, weekly habit that cut their household expenses nearly in half and that almost nobody practices anymore. It has nothing to do with herbs, but it follows the exact same spirit as everything I have shown you today. Taking something simple and free and using it on purpose instead of letting it slip away unused. Until then, look down at your own lawn before you reach for your own medicine cabinet, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.